What is the mind? What is consciousness? Where does it come from? Is it a product of the brain, or is it a separate independent process? These questions have intrigued mankind's most eminent thinkers and researchers for millennia, and are part of an ongoing scientific and philosophical debate called the mind-body problem. In this episode of Do You Mind, we shall review past and present hypotheses for mental causation, their strengths and weaknesses, and how neurostimulation and neuroplasticity can also suggest that the mind is not, as commonly believed, a product of the brain, but instead an intertwined, yet independent process, with a near-complete ascendancy over the body. In the previous episode of Do You Mind, we saw that the mainstream interpretation of the mind as a product of neurological activity is not based on factual evidence, but on a metaphysical thesis called physicalism, which states that all natural phenomena are physical or its derivative, and that nothing exists over and above the physical. Such a premise on the nature of the universe is contrary to recent findings in quantum physics, which highly suggest the presence of a parallel universe or multiverse, and quintessential states of matter and energy that are yet unaccounted for by the Standard Model. Without a proper mechanistic explanation or supporting evidence, the physicalist interpretation of the mind as a product of the brain is nevertheless presented as fact in academic literature, while remaining authoritative in modern science and medicine, and has therefore rightly gained the status of scientific dogma. This brings us back to the very old, yet unsolved question of mental causation, and why should neurological activity give rise to subjective, conscious experience? The earliest known mention of the brain is found in a papyrus written around 1600 BC. Its prior authorship is attributed to the great priest Imhotep, whose healing abilities had him deified and revered after his death around 2700 BC. In the papyrus, he described a variety of lesions observed in war victims and veterans, using specific anatomical terms. 4th century BC Hippocrates, who is regarded as the father of ethics in medical practice, believed that the brain was not only the seat of intelligence, but the interpreter of consciousness. Chinese physician and surgeon Hua Tuo introduces the use of mafaisan, and paves the way for surgical anesthesia. Significant knowledge on brain structure appears through the animal dissections of Greek anatomist Galen, during the Roman Empire. The Islamic Golden Age sees physician and astronomer Avicenna, or Ibn Sina, compile the Canon, a medical encyclopedia that would become a staple at universities for nearly 100 years. Anatomist and physician Andreas Vesalius publishes De Humani Corporis Fabrica Libri Septem, in 1543, which would become one of the most influential books on human anatomy. The 19th and 20th centuries witnessed the fields of physiology and neuroscience bloom in unprecedented ways, with the works of Charles Bell, Hans Berger, and Claude Bernard, just to name a few. Thus, we are looking at over 4,000 years of investigation, experiments and observations, nowadays made with equipment of a level of sophistication that past centuries' researchers could only dream of. Yet, no matter how deep we probe into the brain, the mind is nowhere to be found, nor are we even close to a satisfactory mechanistic explanation for the mind. While many fields of science have yielded conclusive results, there is still no consensus to be found in present-day theories on the mind, which are sometimes nebulous or marred by assumptions. For biologist and philosopher Humberto Maturana, higher-level mental processes, such as the intellect or reason, would have arisen roughly 10 to 15 million years ago, in our common ancestor the Hominidae or great apes. Increasing social interactions in small groups and the consequent physical proximity would have led to the appearance of languaging, which he understands as the gestures and physical contacts between living beings. The subsequent appearance of coordinated language would have caused an anatomical development of the brain, allowing a form of self-referentiality, where the individual distinguishes itself from the others, and also develops the notion of self, that is seen as distinct to the body. In Maturana's interpretation, the mind or consciousness does not have an objective existence per se, a view that is coherent with eliminative materialism. Consequently, his theoretical position does not require a mental causation hypothesis. For neuroscientist Antonio Damasio, the basic form or core consciousness is considered a level of biological processing ensuring homeostatic equilibrium in a living organism, and would mainly arise from the brain stem. Meanwhile, higher-level mental processes such as memory, emotions, imagination and decisions would arise from a variety of brain areas, that he distinguished as image-making and dispositional areas. While we can certainly agree that we do not actually store images in the brain, but only their perceived intrinsic meanings, his theoretical approach relies heavily on correlations, and thus, falls short of an actual mechanistic explanation of how homeostasis, or neurological processing could lead to subjective, conscious experience. Similarly, Gerald Edelman hypothesizes that consciousness, as a neurodarwinistic dynamic core, would arise from the brain stem, and states that the quality of the pure sensation of red corresponds to the discrimination that has been made among billions of other states within the same reference space. In a review of his book published the following year, Dyke and Bleecker conclude, what is missing is the explanation of why it is unavoidable, given the theory that such a discrimination constitutes consciousness. Damasio also posits that the autobiographical self would come into existence as the organism comes to life, a claim that contradicts certain mental phenomena to be analyzed in other episodes of Do You Mind? The core of the question here is that since ancient times up to the present, not a single compelling and satisfactory theoretical framework has been put forth to explain how purely neurological phenomena should give rise to mental phenomena. This point is crucial because the mind itself remains an unknown object of study, and understanding its essence is far less intuitive than, for example, studying biological processes. As we can see, the mind-body problem is likely the mother of all problems for modern science and philosophy, and we can only hope to bring yet another piece in this challenging, yet fascinating puzzle. We shall heavily rely on scientific research in this episode, where we analyze mental and physiological phenomena, as observed in neuroscience and medicine. However, instead of swiftly taking sides between concepts like monism and dualism, or between evolutionists and literal creationists, we should rather pay closer attention to what many uncommon mental phenomena suggest, and through deduction and further research, hopefully reach a better understanding on the essential nature of the mind. We have previously seen that correlations between neurological activity and conscious experiences reported by individuals are mistakenly interpreted as a demonstration for the neural causation of the mind, and that such a hasty conclusion is largely due to an observational bias, resulting from the mechanistic worldview pervading much of modern science. Yet, research on correlations and neurostimulation also suggest that the mind is not an emergent property of the brain after all. World-renowned pioneer neurosurgeon Wilder Penfield started his career as a convict materialist. Yet, he gradually saw his views change in over 30 years of investigating cognitive experiences caused by brain surface stimulation.
During my life as a brain surgeon, it has been necessary to operate on a good many men and women, a good many hundreds, and to expose the brain under local anesthesia.
He had the rare opportunity to study over 1,000 fully conscious brain surgery patients, asking them to report what they experienced during the stimulation of a given area of their brain.
You said, "I hear music." Then I repeated it without warning you a little while later. You said, "I hear that music again." Tell us the truth.
He could make them lift a limb, see flashes of light, recall memories, or suffer a temporary physical impediment. However, he could never stimulate the intellect, or the power of reason in patients, nor could he stimulate them to do calculus or think of an abstract thought such as mercy. Investigating epileptic seizures, Penfield noticed that many involved what is called a focal seizure, causing uncontrollable tingling or twitching of a limb, movements that he could also cause through neurostimulation on brain surgery patients. Nevertheless, he never saw a seizure where a patient couldn't stop doing logic or arithmetic. If logic and abstract thought came from the brain, he thought, we would eventually see a seizure making them happen. After decades of research, he insightfully concluded that, if the intellect or abstract thought are never caused by neurostimulation or seizures, then such higher-level mental processes are not products of the brain. In his book Mystery of the Mind, written shortly before his passing in 1976, Penfield concludes that it is now reasonable to suggest that the brain and mind are of a distinct, and different essence. Nearly half a century has passed, and although significant advances have been made in understanding the molecular and cellular processes of learning and memory, we are still nowhere near a purely mechanistic explanation for subjective, conscious experience. As Penfield himself suggested in his book, perhaps it is time for researchers, and philosophers, to set aside their preconceptions, and seriously investigate hypotheses that may explain more mental phenomena, even if this means hypotheses that are contrary to the physicalist beliefs that abound in the scientific milieu. Such conclusions on the mind-body problem coming from an acclaimed neurosurgeon with extensive experimental research should not be disregarded. His hypothesis consequently posits that only lower-level manifestations of the mind, such as those related to homeostatic equilibrium, instinct, motor skills, and short-term memory are codependent on, or more directly implemented in brain circuitry, precisely because their functions are biologically mandatory. Meanwhile, higher-level processes like the intellect and abstract thought would pertain to quantum-like or non-classical processes, being only partially rooted in the right hemisphere, a hypothesis to be further analyzed in other episodes of Do You Mind? Penfield's insightful observation is in part corroborated by a more recent study by Schlegel et al. On visual imagery manipulation in the mental workspace, which states, these findings challenge existing, anatomically modular models of the neural basis of higher-order mental functions, suggesting that such processes may occur at least in part at a fundamentally distributed level of organization. Shall these findings be corroborated by further studies, they could have considerable consequences for various fields of science. In particular, this could mean that the relatively recent fields of psychology and psychiatry may have been wrong, since their inception, on the very nature of the object they hope to study, the human mind. In the 20th century, scientists regarded the brain as a largely immutable organ after the growth observed in childhood and teenage. This view was later proven wrong, and the brain is now known to be subject to changes throughout a lifespan. The term plasticity expresses the capacity to be molded, altered, or transformed. Neuroplasticity encompasses a variety of changes that occur in the brain's neural networks through growth and reorganization. It mostly occurs as a result of learning and practicing a new ability, environmental influences, or psychological stress, and varies from the creation of new neuron pathways to more complex, systematic changes like cortical remapping. Invariably, neuroplasticity raises the same ontological problem as mental causation. Here, researchers assume that the brain has the ability to rewire or repair itself. To identify, label, and explain the biological processes of plasticity is certainly a notable achievement. However, the non-observable rules, determining parameters, and organizational mind molecular mechanism responsible for its occurrence remain largely unknown, an open issue that we shall coin the hard problem of neuroplasticity. Understandably, researchers are often astonished by the wonders of the mind. Yet, the marvels that they are ready to acknowledge are confined within the purely organic machine they believe the brain to be. Consequently, their apprehension of mental phenomena is severely limited by assumptions, such as the one stating that the brain produces a thought. Harvard neuroscientist Sarah Lazar has done extensive research on neuroplasticity occurring as a result of practicing meditation and yoga. She scientifically confirmed the health benefits that have been claimed by Oriental traditions since time immemorial, much to the dismay of physicalists, who are always ready to dismiss so-called alternative practices as unworthy of attention. Lazar's research demonstrates that activity-dependent neuroplasticity arises from the use of cognitive functions and personal experience, where the mind alters the structure and neurons in the brain. It is worth noting here that it is not the brain that rewires itself, but the mind that alters the brain circuitry, a distinction that will prove to be of fundamental importance further on. As we have seen in the previous episode, in the physicalist interpretation, mental processes supervene on living organisms. Yet, in strictly biological terms, an alleged effect or emergent property such as the mind cannot logically alter or restructure its cause, the brain. A hypothesis brought forth by physicalists to address this issue claims that both brain and mind interact in a recursive feedback loop, simultaneously being their respective causes and effects. This is a seemingly logical hypothesis, but it is nevertheless paradoxical that physicalists should resort to arguments based on substance or property dualism to defend their monistic views. The downward causation structure adopted in neuroscience and biochemistry locates the mind or consciousness at the top, as a result, or emergent property which supervene on all other levels. However, if the mind can alter the brain at the cellular, molecular, and perhaps even particle levels, wouldn't it be more accurate to put it at the very bottom of the causation structure? The fact that the mind can rewire and restructure neurons does not instead suggest that it is also the causal, organizing force, responsible for the structuring of molecules, cells, and organs? That it is thus fundamental, and the body, derivative? One of the most dreadful questions of potentially cataclysmic consequences for many fields of science is, could the assumption that the mind is a product of the brain have been wrong all along? In the next episode, we will analyze challenges found in the field of psychiatry, and a still misunderstood mental disorder, also suggesting that the mind may not be, as commonly believed, a product of the brain, but instead an intertwined, yet independent process, with a near-complete ascendancy over the body. All this, and much more, on Do You Mind?